Just tuning in. Sorry, we got a little bit of a late start today. Had a couple of technical difficulties, but we are live and we've got a lot of things to cover. So hopefully you're going to tune in and check it out. So I'm just waiting to make sure that we're going live on all the streams. Lots of exciting stuff to cover today. Had an exciting, announcement this week about our campaign. So we'll go into a little bit of that. But before that, the most important thing that was discussed all day today was the government shutdown and the continuing resolution. There's good news there, obviously, to report. But on top of that, we want to talk about the Buildback Better, which is now in the Senate. Remember, it passed in the House, but it has not passed in the Senate yet. So it's not law. That is the most important thing, and it is being debated in the Senate right now. So we'll talk about that. We will also talk about what's going on with the pandemic that just will not end. And this is something that we talked a little bit about in my Twitter spaces, and I have a little bit of an update. And of course, there's an interesting topic today that, Biden announced some measures against the Omicron variant, and so there's something interesting in that in that announcement, and I want to point that out to you because it's quite different from what has happened so far. The biggest news, however, is that the case in Mississippi is being right now presented in front of the Supreme Court of the U.S. And that is of huge concern because we are talking about overturning a landmark settled, quote unquote, settled case, which doesn't seem to be any longer. And what brought us here, we'll get into a little bit of that. And of course, I'm going to end with really great news, not only about the announcement of our campaign in the 37th district in Texas, but how our campaign is completely critical, not just to every single Texan and Texas in general, but how we are in the critical path of being able to actually repeal what's going on around these, Roe versus Wade type cases, the Senate Bill 8 that was passed in Texas earlier this year with respect to what's called the heartbeat bill. So how are we going to play a part in this, and why are we so critical? So with that, let's get started. So my name is Donna Imam, and I'm running for U.S. Congress in Austin, Texas. This is a brand new district, Texas's 37th district, and of course we'll discuss that at the very end. Now, I want to welcome you all back because I know that we took a break for Thanksgiving. Last Thursday was Thanksgiving. I hope you hopefully had a wonderful time with your family, but if not, at least it was cordial and you got to see them. And for those of you who traveled, I hope you're well. You're not, you didn't catch something while you were traveling, and I hope you just had a good time with your family. So with that, let's get started. So tomorrow, the government is supposed to be shut down. So today they had a discussion. This is December 3rd. And so it's called what's called a continuing resolution. It's a way to fund the government of the United States. And it's a little bit of a joke in the sense that every so often we talk about the government being shut down. Now, it has been shut down for days, if not weeks, in the past. It's even happened in the very recent past. But nevertheless, that's what the big news was for today. So to complete that out, the House has approved the stopgap spending bill, as you can see here, reported through February the 18th. So yet again, February 18th, 2022, we will be back to this position where we will try to figure out how we will fund the government. So that's that. The vote did pass 221 to 212. All Democrats voted yay. So the interesting part here is there was one GOP House member, Adam Kinzinger, who also voted for this bill. And the point to point out here is that Adam Kinzinger is not running for Congress. He has been redistricted out of, I believe, Illinois. And now all of a sudden he's making decisions that don't depend on his party. And this is both interesting as well as sad that our government runs not in the interest of people, because it seems like he's voting in a completely different way than he might have if he was running for office. And, in a way that possibly he doesn't have to worry about. So if you don't have to worry about being reelected under your banner, whatever that may be, whether it's the GOP or the Democratic Party, all of a sudden you start doing things that make sense to the American people. And so Congress should be doing that anyway, because it's the American people who vote for them, regardless of who donates to them, and put them in power. And so they should be making the best decision for the American people and take that into account. But you can see here a really great example of how things change very much. Now, of course, this has to go on the Senate. Apparently, there is an agreement in the Senate. There was some talk about Republicans not wanting to pass the continuing resolution in the Senate. But the last that I have heard, which was literally 10 minutes ago, is that there has been a deal made and this will pass in the Senate this evening. So looks like we have averted yet another government shutdown. So the Buildback Better bill is now in the Senate. And as you know, for the past, several months, I've been covering this in depth and kind of going through every single turn that this bill has taken. So let's just do a quick recap. This is the bill that basically originally started out at $10 trillion and went to $6 trillion, and then $3.5 trillion was the floor. And in $3.5 trillion, we have things like universal pre-K, the child tax credits, which are already actually being enacted. So people are getting anywhere between $250 and $300 for every child. Of course, Medicare expansion, which included lowering the age of Medicare down to 60, adding hearing and dental and vision, as well as lowering prescription drug prices, which is a big deal, especially if you, have a regimen that you have to take all the time. And climate mitigation, paid leave was huge. It was discussed in a really, really big way. And my favorite, of course, tuition-free community college, which I believe is the biggest investment that we can do for people in our country. And it's the biggest return on investment that we can expect. And of course, giving a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients and temporary protected status recipients. So that was sort of the big full package of 3.5 trillion. And then we came down to the 1.7 trillion version, which was passed in the House. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, this is prior to Thanksgiving. And as I pointed out multiple times, that many of these things will not go into effect until 2023. Of course, child tax credits are being extended through 2022 if it passes as is. Paid leave is still up in the air because it's something Senator Manchin is apparently against. And of course, my favorite part, tuition-free community college is out. There is no citizenship for DACA recipients in there right now. However, some immigration policies are being discussed, but pathway to citizenship, as far as I know, is out. The one item that has been really debated among Democrats is the SALT tax. And I've covered this extensively. This is the state and local deduction that people are able to make. This was reduced down to a cap of $10,000. That has been increased to $80,000. It is the second biggest expenditure, that Washington Post is reporting. And as you can see here, it benefits the ultra wealthy. So one of the challenges with the SALT tax, obviously, is that there are other ways that could have been done, because obviously, middle-class families, and I had someone on my Twitter Spaces talk about this, how it would impact middle-class families on the coastal, states. However, there are very few middle-class families, if any, that have a $80,000 tax burden, a state and local tax burden, whether that's, real estate tax, income tax, state income tax, etc., combined together. There are very few, middle-class people. In fact, 87%, this is a figure that I saw, 87% of Americans do not itemize their taxes. So we're talking about, first of all, only the top 13%. Of those top 13% who have a tax burden of up to $80,000. That is not a lot of people, and that's what's demonstrated right here. You can see exactly what kind of salary you'd have to have. Basically, people over 366,000 are the ones that are getting majority of this benefit, if not, the overwhelming majority of this benefit. So that's kind of where we are with the with the SALT tax, which was being debated. Something that obviously, even though I support many things in this, I'm very, very disappointed that we don't have a tuition-free community college. And I'm obviously disappointed that the SALT tax, it doesn't have a much lower cutoff, let's say. That really does impact middle-class families instead of, giving another tax cut to ultra-wealthy. And I think this is something that people who will notice this among Democrats will it'll have an impact because it obviously does not portray the fact that Democrats are for working class families, and specifically for working families. We're talking about the bottom 50% of our country. Now, we talked a little bit about immigration, but the important part here is that, unfortunately, pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients or dreamers or temporary protected status seems to be out right now. What is being actually debated are some other immigration provisions. These are important, by the way. They're not nothing. For a lot of people, they will make a huge difference. Number one is offering up to 5-year work permits and deportation protections for many, many undocumented people in the country right now. Now, you may be asking what this 5-year work permit is. DACA recipients right now are able to renew their work permit every 2 years. This would extend it to 5 years instead of 2 years. And you may be like, well, why, what difference does it make? It makes a huge difference because every time you apply for DACA, you lose a bunch of months. So let's say you apply 6 months ahead to make sure your application gets processed on time. It gets, that application gets processed based on the date that you applied and not based on the date that you actually have the ability to continue to work. So you lose a bunch of months, and so you're basically paying over and over again. You're not even getting the full 2 years for the application fee, which is upwards of $500. So it is quite a big expense also for people who are applying. It also, these immigration provisions that are being debated or were debated today, in fact, and Senator Durbin is the kind of lead point guy in the Senate that's put this in front of the parliamentarian, is that it extends protections for the parents of U.S. citizens and roughly half of other undocumented immigrants as well, that right now are unable to apply for DACA. So, for example, there are a lot of restrictions around being able to apply for DACA. You may not have qualified. This would extend some of these protections to you, and also may possibly give you the ability to not be deported, etc., and apply for some sort of work permit, even though it does not have any direct pathway to citizenship. Now, I want to end with this because I've said this many times, that the Senate Democrats can ignore the parliamentarian. The parliamentarian, there is absolutely nothing that indicates a parliamentarian would allow any of this, even this minimal immigration measure that is being fought for right now, which is basically extending something from 2 years to 5 years, etc. And of course, giving some protections to a lot of people, and that will impact a lot of people's lives. So we can't discount that completely. But the bottom line is that Democrats can ignore the parliamentarian. They do not have to fire the parliamentarian. And in order to override that decision, you would need more than 60 votes in the Senate, which the GOP does not have in the Senate. So there is a way to get this done. This is something that Democrats ran on and have been running on for decades. Early 2000s, late 99s is when Democrats have been trying to get some sort of status for specifically dreamers, people who were brought into the United States as children at no fault of their own and at no decision-making capability of their own at the time, and of course grew up often to find out that they do not have some sort of status in the United States. So this can be averted if the Democrats really wanted to do it. Right now, they put this in front of the parliamentarian, and it doesn't even look like this will pass, but who knows? Let's wait to see what happens in the Buildback Better in the Senate. So that's where we are with Buildback Better in the Senate, and let's go to the pandemic. So earlier this week and throughout this week, what we saw was the new variant being talked about quite a lot. It's called Omicron, and of course, no one has any information about it. What we do know that today, President Biden came out with a strategy on combating Omicron. This includes several steps, and I will play you some very pertinent clips from that announcement, so you don't have to watch the whole thing. But the big part here is that we're going to talk about testing, which is something very different, which I told you I'd talk about. But before that, I wanted to go over this article really quickly. So right now, it looks like the Biden administration is considering requiring stricter testing for everyone traveling to the United States. And so this is really interesting because you would think that we would have this in place already. The fact that people are traveling internationally would not have very strict testing requirements in order to be able to travel seems very illogical. So this came as quite a surprise to me that this is not already in place, because obviously some testing is required to be able to travel into the United States, but these requirements for testing have been made stricter. Now, that's not the key difference, by the way. I'm waiting to give you the key difference, and I'm going to play you a clip of the video to see if you can discern the key difference between the policy so far till now. So let's listen to this. This is just less than a minute and a half.
I'm back to announce our action plan to battle COVID-19 this winter. And it doesn't include shutdowns or lockdowns, but widespread vaccinations and boosters and testing and a lot more. First is expanding the nationwide booster campaign with more outreach, more appointments, more hours, more times and sites to walk in, providing boosters shots for up to 110 million Americans who are eligible for boosters. Launching new family vaccination clinics to make it easier for children, parents, and whole families to get vaccinated in one place. And new policies to keep our children in school instead of quarantining them at home. The third piece of this is making free at-home tests more available than ever before, and having them covered by your private insurance plans, available in thousands of locations and available at community health centers and other sites for the uninsured who don't have insurance. We're going to accelerate efforts to vaccinate the rest of the world and strengthen the international travel rules for people coming to the United States. My plan I'm announcing today pulls no punches in the fight against COVID-19, and it's a plan that I think should unite us. We're going to fight this variant with science and speed, not chaos and confusion.
So there you go. So I don't know if you caught that, but there are a couple of things in here that are quite interesting. One, obviously vaccinations, boosters, there's nothing new there. Biden administration came in encouraging everyone to get vaccinated because it was the best way to prevent, coronavirus. If you contracted coronavirus, that would prevent you from being hospitalized, and it's a way to prevent the healthcare system from, being overloaded with too many patients. So that's pretty evident. The interesting part here is not about testing when you're traveling, but it's about the ability to be able to get tested, period, in a much more easier way. So there's two things here. One is the availability of testing to everyone in the United States through their insurance companies, where insurance would cover the cost of testing, at-home testing. So specifically at-home testing. And the second part is free testing for people who are not insured, people who do not have health insurance. That's tens of millions of people. Almost 30 million people in the United States have no health insurance whatsoever. And so what came out today was that there would be 50 million at-home tests that would be distributed across public, health places, community health centers, etc., so that people who are uninsured, who do not have any health insurance, would be able to get testing. Now, this is a very interesting change in the policy that wasn't pushed earlier, and I believe should have been pushed earlier, because if your focus is to stop the transmission and the contraction of this virus, you want to take out every single tool in your toolbox. And of course, testing and also tracking, the virus in terms of how it's being transmitted. Those were two tools that really haven't been properly used. So this is a huge change. It's a big impact. And I believe that we should have invested in this long time ago. The third the third part he talks about is having, families come together to be able to get vaccinated in one spot. He talks about travel restrictions and being able to, make sure you get properly tested, etc. But the most important thing in this entire, strategy of going after the virus and putting a clamp on the virus is the testing portion of it. And of course, last week we also saw that more Americans have passed away from coronavirus in 2021 than 2020, even with the fact that we have now, according to the CDC, close to 80 million adults, 80% of American adults have been vaccinated at least once, and close to 70%, if not over 70%, are fully vaccinated that, in the United States. But of course, we have still lost so many lives, more than even that we lost in 2020. And that's really difficult to understand given that we have all these tools. So adding testing is a very important part of ending this pandemic. I'm really glad to see this, and I would have liked to have seen this start much earlier. The one part that's left out from the strategy that I think absolutely has to be a tool is the introduction of therapeutics and therapeutics for people who contract COVID, regardless of whether they're vaccinated or not. We know that there are lots of breakthrough cases, and it is important for us to be able to address people who actually have contracted the virus as a way to combat the pandemic. So the big difference here is that testing is going to be much more available. It'll be interesting to see how much available it is and whether this helps us with the pandemic. So with that, Roe v. Wade. So what is going on there? As you know, when Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh was confirmed, one of the big stories was, Susan Rice from Maine, senator from Maine, who is part of the GOP. She is pro-women's reproductive health care. And she had a conversation with Kavanaugh. She said it was the longest meeting that Kavanaugh had of any of the other senators. And what they decided, what she concluded, was that Roe v. Wade was settled law. And she reported on this. She's quoted on this as Supreme Court Justice nominee at the time. Kavanaugh agreed with her that this was settled law. Now, as you know, Mississippi, the Supreme Court is hearing a Mississippi case that bans reproductive health care after 15 weeks. This is being heard in the Supreme Court right now. And all of the data that's out there shows that, more than 70%, so we're talking about 76% of Americans want it to stay as is. So just 24% of Americans want Roe v. Wade overturned. This is a poll. Again, I'm not saying take polls as a complete conclusion to everything, but this is a strong directional poll that majority, if not the overwhelming majority of Americans, want to see Roe v. Wade overturned. Now, here's another piece of data that I saw, that for the first time, over half of Republican voters, they joined majorities of Democratic voters and independents by saying that Roe should remain the law of the land. That's a significant development because we know that, an overwhelming majority of Democrats and even independents, for example, over 64%, Democrats over 77%. Now, over 53% of Republican voters do not believe that this should be overturned. However, what we're seeing based on this Mississippi case is that it may get overturned. It looks like it's going to get overturned. And I also saw this piece of news where it says now Senator Collins said she'd support legislation to codify protections in Roe v. Wade. So this will be interesting to see if that happens. This is one way to ensure that it does not get overturned in the Supreme Court. But this being overturned in the Supreme Court has extremely sad ramifications for us here in Texas, as well as 11 other states. So what is that? If the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, here's what this means for Texas and 11 other states. So as I reported just now, SCOTUS heard oral agreements in what's called the Dobbs v. Jackson case. That's Mississippi's 15-week ban on reproductive health care, period. Now, in addition to that, the Texas GOP passed what's called Senate Bill 8 in 2021, and that bans reproductive health care after 6 weeks for Texans. It also places a $10,000 bounty on the heads of anybody who helps Texans violate this law. So if you assist in that, that is a law that is now enacted and is law in Texas. We are living that right now as Texans. Now here's the kicker, and the most sad part of this. The Texas GOP has already passed legislation that ensures reproductive health care would be banned completely. Not 6 weeks, not any number of weeks, completely banned, along with 11 other states. This is called what's called a trigger bill. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, House Bill 1280 makes it a felony, not just bans it, but makes it a felony for seeking reproductive health care in Texas. Those are these very, very strong ramifications of the Supreme Court right now overturning Roe v. Wade. This is a serious impact to Texans and 11 other states if it gets overturned, number one, and it gets pushed back. So states, you do whatever you want. We're going to overturn this and let states do what they feel is right for the states. At that point, that's what happens in Texas. It becomes completely banned, and it's a law that has already been passed, so there's no legislation needed to get there. Now, this ties right into our race. And I want to end today with the good news about our race here in Texas, and I'll explain in a second how. So this week we announced that I would be running for Texas's 37th district. So a little bit of back history. On June 28th, what our campaign concluded was it was very highly likely that Austin, Texas would get a Democratic-leaning district, a brand new district, because Texas had been awarded 2 new districts after the 2020 census. One of those, after redistricting was complete in October, did go to Austin, Texas. It is a Democratic-leaning district, if not a solid blue district. The state is further gerrymandered, and this, pulls all of Austin together. So what was it like prior to that? So I'm going to show you a quick map. Austin is sliced up like a pizza into 6 pieces. So you can see here 6 colors here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is how Austin is sliced right now. It's gerrymandered to the extreme where they've taken small slices of Austin, Texas, and appended it with large swaths of rural land. Now, out of these 6 slices, 5 of them are represented by extreme GOP Congress members right now. And throughout the decade, between 2010 and 2020, these districts became bluer because more people moved into Austin. Over the last decade, Austin became the 11th largest city in the entire country. And over the last decade, Texas saw 95% of its growth in population to be from Hispanic, Latino, and Black and Asian Americans. That's what's happened. And Austin grew to be the 11th largest city. So you can see here how it was sliced. And now, after the redistricting, what we have is Texas's 37th district. You can see that all of these 6 pieces of Austin have been brought together into one district, creating a district with all of city of Austin in it. That's where we are. Now, why is this race so critical to Texas and all of Texas? Here's the reason why. Texas is so gerrymandered that there are no races, both at the state House level, at the state Senate level, and at the U.S. congressional level that are considered competitive, meaning that they have been cut in a way that they're either lean strongly GOP or red or Republican voters, or strongly blue Democratic voters. That means there are very few chances, specifically in 2022, where a race would be competitive. There may be one or two races in the entire bag of all the different positions that you can run for in Texas. But the majority, if not almost all of them, have been predetermined whether they will have a Republican representative or a Democratic representative. So what does that mean, and where does that put us? That puts us in a position where the only way that we can reverse some of this damage that the Texas GOP and the GOP legislator of Texas have enacted on Texans is by winning statewide races. Winning statewide races is the way we take back Texas, because statewide there's no gerrymandering. The good news here is that in 2018, when Beto O'Rourke ran for Senate, he was short just only 215,000 votes. That gap can be closed if every single Democrat in the bluest parts of Texas understands that it's a very small gap that we can all close if we want to. By winning statewide races, we now have lots of say over the Texas legislature and over the laws in Texas. We can start repealing things like Senate Bill 8. How, you ask? The governor in Texas has line item veto power. So when bills get passed in the Texas legislature, the governor can pick and choose what laws to keep and which ones to strike, number one. Number two, the lieutenant governor's race. If you win that, which is a statewide race, you have a lot of say over the agenda of the Texas legislature and influence over the Texas legislature and the agenda of the Texas legislature. So that is a huge opportunity. Now in 2018, the lieutenant governor in Texas only won with 51.6% of the vote. Now in Texas, you have to get over 50%, but you can see that it's a slim margin, right? 1.6% more. So that race is also very much winnable. Now you go to the AG's race, the Attorney General's race. Ken Paxton, who is our current Attorney General, was indicted in 2015. In fact, the GOP is so afraid that he may lose this job that he has multiple people, quite big names in Texas politics, primarying him, as does Abbott, by the way, Greg Abbott at the top of the ticket. Greg Abbott has Allen West, who was the GOP chairman, the GOP chair of Texas. He quit that to run, primarying him. He also has another well-known person, previously elected person, who is primarying him right now. Then we have Ken Paxton, who is being primaried by the infamous Louis Gohmert, Congressman Louis Gohmert in Congress. He's also being primaried by our current, statewide elected, nephew of George W. Bush, who is primarying him, because they're so fearful that Ken Paxton could indeed lose the race. In fact, Ken Paxton in 2018, he won the race by 0.6% of the vote. He only got 50.6% of the vote. You only need 50%, more than 50% of the vote to win in Texas. So each of these three races are very much winnable. If you win the AG's race, all of a sudden the DOJ can collaborate with the AG of Texas to come after some of these Texas without being completely overturned or fought. So there are lots of opportunities. And the good news is that based on my calculations and our campaign's calculations, there were over 100,000 Democratic votes left on the table in Austin, Texas in 2018. So what does that mean? That means Austin, Texas has some of the highest voter registration numbers in the entire country. The voter registration numbers here are upwards of 90%. Last I heard, 96, 97, 98% of voters in the Austin, Texas, Travis County, and Williamson County area, over 90% of them, if not over 95, 96, 97, 98% of them are registered voters. That's number one. So voter registration is not a barrier to voting. What is a barrier is getting Democrats out to vote. So if we can get that extra 100,000 votes out in Travis County, in Austin, Texas, we can flip these statewide races. In a midterm in 2022, what usually happens is that if you have the Democratic president, which we do, we have Joe Biden in office right now, the vote is suppressed somewhat. Many Democrats may not come out in the midterms because there's no presidential election at the top of the ticket. However, because Democrats have a trifecta in Washington, even though it is a very slim trifecta in Washington, right? The GOP has much more enthusiasm. They are much more riled up to get their voters out, which means that Republican voters are much more motivated because they have just suffered a loss, right? They lost the presidency, they don't have the House, and they don't have the Senate, right? So they have a lot more reason to come out in full force. Now, Democratic voters, there are some very reliable voters. We know the demographic 65 and over are very reliable voters. We also know that there's a set of voters that come out in every single election, no matter what. They're very dedicated. They take their civic duty very seriously. However, the Democratic Party is quote unquote the Big Ten. So you need to bring out all the other people who believe that they have been left out. We're talking about working families who today in Texas do not have health care. They don't have health insurance at all. Because remember, Texas did not expand Medicaid, so they don't have health care. They're struggling to figure out how they will afford to buy a home because they have large student loan debt. We have thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people in Austin that cannot afford to buy a home in Austin anymore. Now that it's become the 11th largest city, buying a home in Austin has become impossible. The median price of a home shot up from somewhere around $250,000 in Austin to over $520,000. I saw the median home price in Austin over $527,000. That's over $500,000 in Austin, Texas. It is very difficult for young families to be able to live here. So they are thinking about what is the Democratic Party going to do for me to be able, so I can live, where I work. If you're talking about even people who are retired on a fixed income, in Texas, we don't have income taxes, but we have what's called real estate taxes. And real estate taxes are close to 3%. They're very high in Austin, Texas. So if you're on a fixed income, you are being priced out of the home that you have paid off. So let's say you purchased a home in Austin, Texas, and you have completely paid it off. But right now, the real estate taxes on that home is unaffordable on your fixed income. Maybe you were a school teacher. Maybe you were a social worker. Maybe you never made over $60,000 a year. You can't afford on that Social Security fixed income to be able to pay your taxes. Think about teachers and people who are in the bottom 50% of our country that are right now teaching in the Austin ISD, for example. They may be better off going and teaching in a different ISD instead of making the trip for an hour or an hour and a half outside of Austin, traveling in to work here. So these are some of the big challenges that are coming up for Austin, Texas, and we must get all of these people out. If you think the people who feel disenfranchised are going to come out for a message like $15 an hour, that's not going to happen, because in Austin, you cannot live in Austin, Texas on $15 an hour. Almost all the fast food stores in Austin are already offering that, if not more, to be able to work in Austin, because it is actually impossible to live and work in Austin. We're talking about people well into their 30s that are having to live with roommates in apartments, having to share bedrooms as an adult, because the cost of living in Austin, Texas just does not make any sense. So these are some of the challenges that we are going to have to solve in order to be able to get out the vote. We need to be able to get out every single Democratic voter in Austin, Texas. The path to flipping Texas goes right through Austin. Now, why is that good news for our campaign? In 2020, when I ran for Congress, We got the highest Democratic voter turnout in the history of the district. Now, many people will say, well, we had a Democratic presidential primary, so of course you had high turnout. Okay, I'll give you that. But even in the runoff, we had, almost double the number of people come out in a runoff where there was no president at the top of the ticket than the primary from 2018. So almost double the number of people. Think about that. A 248% growth year over year, just from, runoff to runoff, but almost double from a primary to our runoff. So the highest Democratic voter turnout in the history of the district, the highest voter turnout in the history of the district. And in Williamson County, we went to over 50,000 doors, pushing Williamson County to number one in voter turnout among the top 25 counties in Texas. Now, Texas has 249 counties, so you might be like, well, you're in the top 25, but being number one in the top 25 is being number one in all of Texas, because we have many, many rural counties that have very few residents and voters. So, yes, 2020 was a monumental election, but you don't come in number one because of the top of the ticket. A lot of places had high voter turnout. We came in number one because we took our message to the voter where they were. And if we can repeat that again and get out the extra 100,000 votes to close the gap from 2018 to 2022 to help statewide Democratic nominees, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the AG, and so on. If we can help win any one of these seats, all of a sudden, we have this ability to start reversing the damage that the GOP has done to Texas. So with that, I want to thank you for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. And of course, every Thursday, 7 p.m. Central Time, feel free to tune in live here on YouTube or on Twitter. And 9 p.m. Central Time on Mondays, I host a Twitter Spaces. So if you're following me on Twitter, do join in. It's an open conversation that we talk about everything. So with that, I want to